What if everything you've done so far, every late night, every big decision, every milestone, was just the prelude to your real story? What if your true life doesn't actually begin until you've hit 40? It sounds surprising, maybe even a little unsettling, especially in a world that often glorifies youth and treats midlife like a downward slope. But Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, believed exactly that. He once said, "Life really begins at 40. Until then, you are just doing research." At first, this might feel like a bold, even controversial idea. After all, we're told from an early age to hustle hard in our 20s, get established in our 30s, and have it all figured out by midlife. The pressure is immense. Success, stability, and status are painted as the markers of a life well lived. So by the time 40 rolls around, if we're not where we thought we'd be, it can feel like we've fallen behind. And even for those who've achieved traditional markers of success, a solid job, a family, a house, there can still be a nagging question. Is this all there is? Jung's perspective flips that narrative entirely. He believed that the first half of life, our childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood, is just the beginning, a time of preparation. It's when we absorb ideas from the world around us, figure out how things work, and start to shape an identity. It's a period filled with learning, striving, making mistakes, and growing. But according to Jung, that's not the main story. It's just the groundwork for something deeper. When we're young, we're driven by questions like, what should I do with my life? And what will make me successful? These questions guide many of our early choices, what we study, who we date, what jobs we take. We build relationships and careers, often with the goal of fitting in or achieving something that looks good on paper. We want to be seen as capable, impressive, and valuable in the eyes of others. This isn't a bad thing. It's part of growing up. But Jung pointed out that during these early decades, most of us are trying to meet external expectations. We're constructing what he called the persona, the social mask we wear to function in society. This persona is influenced by our family, culture, and environment. It's how we learn to succeed and be accepted. But while the persona is useful, it's not the whole picture. It doesn't represent our full, authentic selves. Around midlife, something starts to shift. We begin to feel the limits of the persona we've been living through. The roles we've played, the professional, the parent, the partner, might no longer feel like they're enough. Even if we've been successful, we might feel a strange emptiness, a sense that something important is missing. This is often what gets labeled as a midlife crisis. But Jung didn't see this as a crisis in the way pop culture often portrays it. It's not just a phase of buying sports cars, changing careers, or making impulsive decisions. Instead, he saw it as the beginning of a deeper, more meaningful journey, a psychological and spiritual awakening. It's the point at which we begin to ask, not just, what do I want, but who am I really? At this stage, the questions become less about achievement and more about purpose. We start to wonder whether we're living in alignment with our true selves. The desires that once felt so urgent, career success, social approval, financial security, begin to lose their grip. Instead, we crave authenticity. We want our outer lives to reflect our inner truth. And that's the beginning of what Jung called individuation. Individuation is the process of becoming whole. It's about integrating all the parts of ourselves, not just the ones we show to the world, but also the hidden, neglected, or even rejected aspects of our personality. Jung referred to this as confronting the shadow, the parts of us we've pushed aside because they didn't fit into our persona. Maybe it's a creative side we abandoned in pursuit of practicality. Maybe it's a deep need for solitude or change that we've ignored for the sake of stability. Facing these shadow aspects isn't easy. It can be uncomfortable, even painful, but it's also deeply liberating. It's how we begin to move beyond surface level living and step into something richer and more meaningful. We stop living according to someone else's script and start writing our own. This phase of life often begins quietly. It might start with a restless feeling you can't quite explain. You might hit a career milestone and still feel unfulfilled. Or you might find yourself lying awake at night wondering, what now? These questions might come up during major life events, a child leaving home, a divorce, a health scare. But even small, everyday moments can trigger them: a long walk, a deep conversation, or simply time spent alone. Once these questions appear, they tend to stick around. They grow louder, more insistent, and eventually they demand to be answered. This is why midlife can feel so intense. It's not because something is going wrong, but because something important is trying to emerge. The world might not always understand this process. Society often prefers us to stay in our roles, to keep things predictable. That's why many people hide their midlife transformation, feeling embarrassed or confused. But Jung encouraged us to see this not as a breakdown, but as a breakthrough. He believed that midlife is when we stop living life by default and start living it by design. We begin to uncover the self that's been waiting patiently beneath the surface, the self that isn't just a collection of achievements, but a unique, complex, and fully alive individual. It's not about rejecting everything from the first half of life. All those years of learning, striving, and adapting, they were necessary. They gave us tools, knowledge, and resilience. But now it's time to use those tools to build a life that truly reflects who we are. In other words, the first half of life is about building the container. The second half is about filling it with meaning. This doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow unfolding, a process that takes time, patience, and courage. We might revisit old dreams, redefine our values, or change the way we relate to others. We might let go of things we once thought were essential and discover new passions we never expected. We begin to listen more to our inner voice and less to the noise of the outside world. And while this path can be challenging, it's also incredibly rewarding. People who embrace this journey often describe feeling more grounded, more peaceful, and more connected to their true selves. They stop trying to prove themselves and start simply being themselves. Life doesn't feel like a race anymore. It feels like a walk, a conversation, a work of art. So if you're approaching or already in midlife and you feel like something's shifting inside you, know this: you're not lost. You're not late. You're not broken. You're just waking up to a deeper part of yourself. Carl Jung saw midlife not as the end of vitality, but as the beginning of wisdom. Not as a period of crisis, but as the moment when we finally begin to live, not for approval, not for status, but for truth. And in that truth, you might just find that the best, most meaningful chapter of your life is still ahead. Facing the parts of ourselves that we've hidden, avoided, or denied, our shadow, can be deeply uncomfortable. It may stir up old wounds or bring us face to face with fears we've tried to bury. At times, it can even feel painful. But this kind of inner work is not just important. It's essential if we want to grow into fuller, more authentic versions of ourselves. Until we're willing to see and accept all parts of who we are, the light and the dark, we can't truly become whole. This process becomes especially important during midlife. For many, this stage brings a shift in priorities and perspective. The first half of life is often focused on building our careers, families, status, and financial security. We strive for achievement and recognition, hoping that external success will make us feel complete. But eventually, for most of us, those outer accomplishments stop feeling as satisfying. A quiet inner voice begins to speak more clearly, asking questions we can't ignore. What really matters to me? What kind of life do I want to live? What do I want to leave behind when I'm gone? These are not questions anyone else can answer for us. They require us to turn inward and listen carefully. The answers won't come from checking boxes on a to-do list or meeting someone else's expectations. They come from deep reflection, honesty, and a willingness to reconnect with ourselves in a new and more honest way. At this stage of life, we start to realize that we've spent a lot of energy trying to become who we thought we should be: successful, impressive, admired. But now we feel a need to ask, who am I really? And who do I want to be? This shift often marks the beginning of a new phase of life, one that is less about proving and more about being. When we're younger, we're often driven by ambition, competition, and the desire to stand out. We push ourselves hard, chase goals, and try to live up to ideals. But as we get older, those external rewards start to lose their grip. We begin to see that the real treasures in life are things like connection, authenticity, peace of mind, and purpose. We start valuing time, truth, and relationships more than titles, trophies, or applause. Psychologists have observed that this inner shift is often accompanied by real changes in the brain. Neuroscientific studies show that as we age, the emotional centers of the brain become more balanced. We're less reactive and more reflective. We learn to manage our emotions with greater ease. This doesn't mean we become emotionless, but rather that we gain the ability to respond to life's ups and downs with a deeper sense of calm and wisdom. We stop getting pulled into every storm, and instead, we learn how to stand in the center of our own lives with clarity and intention. This emotional maturity gives us the power to make choices based on our values rather than our fears. It helps us move away from autopilot living, where we do things just because that's what we've always done, and instead make decisions with intention and self-awareness. We begin to notice what drains us and what nourishes us. We feel more grounded in our own truth. And from this place, we can start creating a life that truly reflects who we are, not just who we've been expected to be. Of course, this journey is not without its challenges. In fact, midlife can be one of the most difficult times of transformation. Questioning who we are and what we want often means letting go of old identities, relationships, habits, or goals. That can feel confusing, scary, or even like a loss. It's no wonder that many people refer to this time as a midlife crisis. But in reality, what we're experiencing isn't a crisis, it's a deep unraveling. And that unraveling, while messy and uncertain, can also be beautiful and necessary. Green Brown describes this period as a time when we are forced to let go of who we think we're supposed to be, so we can embrace who we really are. That's not always easy. It might mean having hard conversations, making big changes, or spending time in uncomfortable reflection. But it also opens the door to incredible growth. When we stop performing and start being honest with ourselves, we create space for real transformation. The desire to find meaning becomes stronger in this stage of life. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote that the primary motivation in human life is not pleasure or power, but meaning. At midlife, this search for meaning becomes urgent. We're no longer satisfied with living according to someone else's script. We want a life that feels true to us. We want to feel like our time, energy, and presence matter. Even if the life we envision now looks very different from what we once imagined, we're willing to follow the path that feels more aligned with who we really are. This often means confronting the fears that have held us back for years. The fear of failure, of being judged, of disappointing others. The fear of stepping into the unknown. These fears may have shaped many of our choices in the past. But at midlife, we're given the opportunity and the courage to face them. We start to realize that fear isn't a reason to stay stuck. It's a signal that we're standing at the edge of something meaningful. Abraham Maslow, a pioneer in humanistic psychology, called this process self-actualization. It's the drive to become the fullest version of ourselves, to live with purpose, presence, and inner alignment. In the first half of life, we may have tried to achieve this through accomplishments or status. But now we understand that self-actualization isn't about proving anything to the world. It's about living in a way that feels deeply true to who we are inside. And the good news is, the journey is worth it. Studies show that people in their 40s, 50s, and beyond often report higher levels of life satisfaction than those in their younger years. They feel more grounded, more connected, and less interested in external validation. They've come to value what truly matters: meaningful relationships, time spent in alignment with their values, and the freedom to be themselves without apology. They stop chasing someone else's definition of success and begin crafting their own. This is the quiet power of midlife. It's not about slowing down, it's about waking up. It's a return to our essence, a peeling away of everything that no longer fits. Carl Jung, the renowned psychologist, believed that this kind of self-acceptance, embracing our whole selves, including the parts we find difficult or painful, is what brings us true freedom. As he said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But it is also the most liberating. Midlife offers us the chance to stop pretending, to stop hiding, to step out of the roles we've been playing and into the truth of who we are. It's not always easy, but it's profoundly rewarding. Because when we begin living from a place of authenticity, everything changes. Our relationships deepen. Our purpose becomes clearer. Our days feel more meaningful. We stop living for the approval of others and begin honoring our own voice. This doesn't mean that everything suddenly becomes perfect. There will still be struggles, losses, and challenges. But now we face them with greater resilience and clarity. We know what matters to us. We've made peace with our past, even if it's been messy. We've accepted our imperfections and learned to treat ourselves with more compassion. Most importantly, we realize that midlife is not the beginning of the end. It's the beginning of something much deeper, a life that feels intentional, connected, and real. It's the start of a new chapter where we don't just survive, we thrive. Not because we have all the answers, but because we're finally asking the right questions. So if you find yourself in this stage of life, questioning, shedding, searching, know that you're not alone. You're not broken. You're becoming. This is the work of transformation, and it's some of the most important work you'll ever do. Let it be messy. Let it be honest. And above all, let it be yours. Because life really does begin at midlife. Not because we finally arrived, but because we finally come home to ourselves.